Okay, good morning, everybody. How we doing? So we all know that Chanukah every year occurs corresponding to the parshiot that tell us the story of Yosef Atzadik and his brothers. That very challenging story that we're in the midst of right now. And what I want to do this morning is kind of take a deep dive and explore the significance, the connection, the parallels to be drawn between the story of Yosef and his brothers and the story and the Yom Tov of Hanukkah. And believe it or not, I think we're going to see some surprising connections, some surprising parallels, and things we never thought of before. Please God. So we're going to begin. We all know the story of Hanukkah as it appears in the Gemara on Shabbos. We don't have to learn this Gemara inside, but we all know the story of Hanukkah is, in its essence, the story of a supernatural flame, right? This cruse of oil that should have burned for one day ends up burning for 8 days, and we celebrate for 8 days. And it's basically the commemoration of a supernatural flame. So where else in the annals, this, by the way, this is not connected to Yosef, at least not yet, where else in the annals of Jewish scholarship and literature do we have the story of a supernatural flame? The burning bush. It's in the title, right? The burning bush. So take a look. This is a Gimel on our sheets. Umosha yaroa tetzon yitro chotzdom koin mijan v'inhagen atzon achar mibar v'yavo el har elkim choreva. Right. So Moshe, as we know the story, he's already left. He's already left Mitzrayim. He's already left the palace of Paro, and he's gone and he's married into the family of Yitro, the Kohen of Midjan. He marries Yitro's daughter, and he's out one day, becomes a shepherd, and he's out one day and he's shepherding the flocks of his father-in-law, and he comes upon the mountain of God at Chorev. Vayira malach Adonai elav labat esh mitoch hasna, vayar v'hinei hasna bo'er b'esh, v'asna enuka. And Moshe Rabbeinu sees the most incredible thing. An angel of God appears before him in a fiery flame within the thorn bush, and he sees that the thorn bush is completely aflame, but it's not being consumed. Okay? Vayomer Moshe Asura na v'arat ha'mareh gadol hazeh madua lo yivar asna. He says, this is impossible what I'm seeing. He says it doesn't make any sense what I'm seeing. How could it be that this thorn bush, which is combustible material, is completely surrounded by a flame and it's not being consumed? And that's the same question that we could ask about the Nespach HaShemen. How could it be that the Shemen, which is combustible material that should have burned up after one day, continues to last and burn for 8 days? So both of these stories, you're dealing with a supernatural flame. Where's what written? This is the in the Gemara on Shabbos that we skipped. That's the first. The story of Chanukah does not appear in Tanakh. Okay, it's not in the, and that's a whole different shiur in terms of why the story wasn't canonized. There are many theories in terms of why. That's not for today, but the as we've talked about numerous times over the past few weeks, first time you're joining us, Baruch Hashem, we've explored that the story of Chanukah appears as basically a Talmudic footnote, okay, within the discussion of what materials were allowed to light, to use to light Shabbos candles in Masechet Shabbat. In the midst of that discussion, the questions asked, do the same halachos apply to the Chanukah candles? Are we allowed to use the same materials to light Chanukah candles as we are for Shabbos candles? And then we get into the discussion, what is Chanukah? And that's where we're introduced to the story of Chanukah, okay? So again, just the couch, the introduction, once again. We have the story of Chanukah, story of a supernatural flame, oil that should have burnt out, that's not consumed. We have the story of the burning bush, okay, where Moshe Rabbeinu comes upon this thorn bush that is combustible material, once again, that should have been completely consumed, and for whatever reason, it is miraculously not being consumed. Okay. We're going to come back to the burning bush in a few moments. Okay, we'll come back to this. Now I want to take a look at the Gemara on Shabbos, the continuation of the discussion of the laws of Chanukah. Okay, this is Hay on our sheets. Amar Rav Kahana, Darish Rav Natan Bar Minyomai, Mishmei de Rebbe Tamtu. Rav Kahana said that Natan Bar Minyomai taught in the name of Rabbi Tanchum. Ner Chanukah shanicha lamal mi'esrim ama psula kesukkah kemuva. Okay, a Chanukah candle that's placed higher than 20 amot, 20 handbreadths in the air, okay, is considered pasul. You're not allowed to place your Chanukah candles too high in the air. And that we're not going to get into the halachic implications. Well, what if I live in a high-rise building or all those questions? That's not for today because that's not the important part, at least for our discussion today. Okay? V'amar Rav Kahana Darish Rav Natan Bar Yumai Mishmei Rav Tanchum. Again, now we're introduced to the same shalshelet of scholars that this Rav Kahana said that Rav Natan Bar Yumai said in the name of Rabbi Tanchum another teaching. Vabor reik ein bo mayim. Okay, dichtiv, my dichtiv. What is the meaning of our pasuk? Vabor reik ein bo mayim. Where do we know? Where's that pasuk from? The story of Yosef, right? Mimash v'shenemar vabor reik eini yodei she'ein bo mayim. He says, since the pasuk already told us that the bore was raked, that the pit was empty, shouldn't we then already know that that means that there's no water there? Why does the verse have to tell us ein bo mayim? Rather, it comes to teach us what? Ein bo mayim. There's no water in the pit. Aval mayim aval nichashav akrabim yeshbo. Okay, there was no water, but everyone knows this because Rashi quotes this Gemara, right? Okay, but there was no water in the pit. The pit was devoid of water, but what was in the pit? Snakes and scorpions. Okay. So, I want to ask a question. The Gemara introduced us to two teachings. One is about the placement of our Chanukiyot, that we shouldn't place them too high in the air. And the other is the story about Yosef in the pit. And seemingly the connection between these two stories seems to be what? That they were taught in the name of the same three teachers, right? Rav Kahana, okay, Rav Natan Bar Yumai, and Rabbi Tanchum. Both of these teachings are taught by the same three teachers and reiterated by the same three teachers. But I want to ask another question. Might there be a deeper connection between these two ideas, other than the fact that that they were taught by the same three people? Now, at face value, our human intellect would say, it must be teaching us what? That if we place our candles too high, then maybe we won't be able to see them clearly, and therefore we can understand the pasuk about Yosef, that when the brothers came to see this pit, when Reuven suggests, let's throw him in the pit, it's empty. Reuven, at first glance, sees there's no water in the pit, but he must have thought the pit was truly empty, and he couldn't really see because it was too deep a pit. So you might think, therefore, that the connection between these two ideas is that if something is placed at too far a distance, you can't see clearly. But as hopefully we're going to learn together in a few moments, there's actually a much deeper connection between these two teachings and a much more fundamental and important connection between these two ideas. Okay, let's go a little further. Okay, just to review, just so everyone understands the context of this pasuk, the Gemara is quoting, if you turn your page over, number 7. This is when Yosef comes to the brothers and they strip him of his coat, and they took the coat from him and they threw him in the pit. And the pit was empty, it had no water. So that's the pasuk that the Gemara is speaking about. And we all know that pasuk. So what else is significant about the wording of this pasuk? That the bore was raked, the bore was empty, ein bo mayim. There was no water in it. The pasuk already tells us it was empty. So why do we have to say there was no water? So we know what the Gemara tells us, and we just learned the Gemara, that there was devoid of water, but there were still scorpions. But why the significance of the word water? Why does the pasuk include the word water? If we're already told it's empty, why do we have to say ein bo mayim? There was no water in it. So the Gemara in Tainis is going to give us a clue. Okay, this is text number 9 on our sheets. The Gemara in Tainis. V'amar Rabbi Chanina bar Idi lama nemshelo divrei Torah lamayim. So Rabbi Chanina bar Idi asked, why is Torah likened to water? Dichti. So this is a famous, right? Everyone knows that Torah is likened to water. Why? The Muslims think it's because water is what sustains us, right? So without you can't live without water. But listen to what the Gemara by the Chaim. Speaking of water, okay. So now listen to this. Dichtiv high called sama l'chul lamayim. Anyone who's thirsty should go and drink from the water. Okay, so lomar l'cha ma mayim manichem makam gavoa v'holchi l'makam namuch. Just as water flows from a higher realm, meaning it starts in the mountains and flows down into the valley. Okay, av divrei Torah ein mekaimim ela b'mi shadatu shvela. Listen to this beautiful idea. Okay, Torah can only be fulfilled by someone who's what? Humble. And that's why Torah is likened to water. Water begins its source up in the heavens, but it flows down up in the mountains, but it flows down into the valley, right? So too, Torah begins up in the heavens, okay? But in order to be fulfilled, it has to come down to earth. And in order for us to fulfill and receive the Torah, we have to be in a space of what? Humility and not haughtiness. For us to truly fulfill Torah and fulfill the Torah's precepts, we have to be in the mindset of humility and not haughtiness. Okay. And then just one last pasuk that I want to look at that we're all familiar with. Kiner mitzvah v'Torah or. That a mitzvah is called a ner, a candle, and Torah is called light. And what I want to do now is hear from the masters of Jewish thought who are going to weave together many of these ideas that we just kind of touched on very quickly. And they're going to weave together for us and paint a picture for us of the parallels and connections to be drawn, the deeper parallels and connections to be drawn between the story of Yosef, the story of the burning bush, and the story of Chanukah. So bear with me as we begin to weave this tapestry together. We're going to start on your sheets with text number 7, Rabbi Gedalia Shor. Rabbi Gedalia Shor is the first of the modern masters we're going to hear from this morning. Rabbi Gedalia Shor was the great Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivas TORAH Vodaas in Brooklyn, New York, Williamsburg. And Rabbi Shor died, I believe, in 1979. His sefer, the Sfarim of his teachings, are called Or Gedaliahu, and this is a short snippet from the Or Gedaliahu on Chanukah that we're going to learn together now. And it says the following: Ketiv kiner mitzvah v'Torah or. The pasuk that we just learned together from Mishlei, that a mitzvah is called a candle and the Torah is called light. Ki kol ha-mitzvot sheb'Torah heim begeder ner. All the mitzvot in the Torah could be described as what? Categorized as being a ner, a candle. Ki ner hu hakli hamuchan l'kabel ha'or. Because a candle is the vessel through which what? We're able to accept and bring light into the world. In other words, if we don't have a source of fuel to light, then we won't be able to see light, right? You have to light a candle to see the light. And therefore the mitzvah become the kli, become the vessel through which a Jewish person is able to receive the light of Torah and bring the light of Torah into the world. Through the mitzvah we are able to bring light into our own lives and into the world around us. Okay? Shamitzvah ma'alim aguf, because the mitzvot elevate the individual spiritually. Aval yitera alehem mitzvah ner Chanukah. If that's true about every single mitzvah, then certainly even more so it's true about what? The mitzvah of the ner, of the candle of Chanukah. Shamitzvah ba'atzma hi b'ner, because the mitzvah itself is what? The candle. So if that imagery of every single mitzvah is a ner, is a kli to bring light into the world, then that is even more powerful, says Rav Gedalia Shor, when we're talking about Chanukah. Because Chanukah, the mitzvah itself, is specifically through the ner, through this vehicle of lighting candles. Okay? Va'or shel mitzvah atzma hi or haTorah. And therefore the light of the mitzvah itself is the light of Torah. When you put on tefillin, you might not be aware of it, but you're metaphysically bringing light into the world. But when you light Hanukkah candles, you are aware of it. Why? Because you see the light. Okay. V'af she'al kol ha'mitzvot kulan ne'emra hakra ki ner mitzvah v'torah. And even though, regarding all the mitzvahs, the pasuk tells us that a mitzvah is called a ner, a candle, and the Torah is called light. Avam yuchedet mitzvah ner Chanukah mishar kol ha'mitzvahs. But Chanukah is unique amongst all the other mitzvahs. Why? Ki ora mitzvah ba'atzma hi ora Torah. Because the light of the mitzvah itself is that light of Torah. Shnitzlabesha ora Torah b'tocha mitzvah de Chanukah. The light of Torah is encloaked within the mitzvah of Chanukah. The zuhi anakuda miuchedet b'ner Chanukah. This is the unique aspect of the Chanukah lights. V'hi ha'chavivut ha'yutera sheyesh b'mitzvah ner Chanukah. That's why the Chanukah mitzvah is so beloved. Why? Sheyesh ba'or Torah, because it refers and reminds us of the light of Torah. What were the Chashmonaim trying to do when they restored and they rose up against the mighty Greek Empire? They become the leaders, but they weren't interested in taking the Malchus for themselves. Why did they rise up? Because they wanted to restore the light of Torah and Kedusha to the world. And that's what Chanukah is all about. Okay. We're going to come back to this idea in a moment. Hopefully, if I do my job right, we'll weave this all together and it'll all become a clear picture. Now we're going to talk about Yosef again. We're going to hear from our second modern master, and that's Rabbi Dov Fink. There's a very, very thin choveret on the sugyot of Chanukah, on the various halachic topics that relate to Chanukah, called Birchat Chaim, and it was written by this Rabbi Dov Fink. I never heard of the sefer until I discovered it about 30 years ago. It's not a very well-known sefer. I found it in like a used Sfarim store in Yerushalayim about 30 years ago. But it's a beautiful sefer on the various topics related to Chanukah. And believe it or not, he's going to talk about our Gemara, which joins the story of Chanukah and placing our Chanukiot to the story of Yosef going into the pit. So look what Rabbi Fink says in text number 8 on our sheets. But when the Chashmonaim were victorious and they overcame the darkness of Greece, what did they do? They restored the light of Torah. They learned and taught Torah. Why? In order to cling to Hashem. And not, God forbid, for their own egos and accomplishments and success. And that's why Hashem gave them the miracle of the lights of the menorah, of that miracle oil, davka, shu ramez al oro shatorah, because that miracle of the shemen and allowing them to rekindle the menorah, that what reiterates the idea of the importance of bringing the light of Torah into the world. Because it wasn't just about overcoming the Greeks and throwing them out. What was the kavanah in throwing out the Greeks? Was to restore the Kedusha and light of Torah into the world. Okay, so that's the first part. V'cholin shel ner Chanukah hu davka sheba ofen shel anivut v'lo begeut. Listen to this idea. And he alludes to it in the first piece, that they weren't interested in taking the Malchus out of their own ego and their own status and stature, but rather they desired to restore the light of Torah and to bring Kedusha back to the world. He says the whole idea of Chanukah is about humility and not haughtiness. The Zel Perush B'Gemara B'Medrash, the Ma'atam Yoetz Ruvain Lashlicha Labor Sheyesh B'Nachashim V'Akravim. Listen to this. He says, and that's how we can understand the story of Yosef. That why Ruvain suggests to throw Yosef into the pit, even though the pit has snakes and scorpions there. Why? That since Yosef had learned Torah, which is likened to water, he would be protected from the scorpions and snakes. Listen to this incredible idea. Who was Yosef at Tzaddik? Why did the brothers resent Yosef? because he was a 17-year-old kid and a little bit conceited because his father seemed to favor him. So the brothers were jealous of him. So Reuven realizes when the brothers are about to kill him, he comes to this pit, says Rabbi Fink, and he sees a pit that has no water in it, okay, meaning the pit is devoid of what's water, devoid of Torah. Yosef has Torah, which hopefully will protect him from the animals he's going to face in this pit. Except, what is Yosef's challenge? He's a little bit of a Baal Gaiva. He has a little bit of an ego problem. And therefore, in order for Yosef to make manifest, that's what we just learned a few moments ago. In order for Yosef to make manifest the Torah that he's learned, he needs to what? First experience being humbled. And therefore, says Rabbi Fink, Reuven suggests, let's put Yosef in the pit. He'll go into the pit. He'll be humbled. He'll be protected from whatever other sakanot are in that pit. Why? Because he has the shmirah of the light of Torah, which will truly be manifest because he's now in this space of humility. The Torah emikayemet ela b'misha dato shvela. And Torah cannot truly be fulfilled unless a person is what? In a space of humility. And this is why the halacha is that you can't place your Chanukah more than 20 amot high. Why? If the Chanukah, if the menorah is meant to remind us that just like the Chashmonaim, when they restored the light of the menorah, they saw this opportunity of restoring Torah and holiness in the world, not because they wanted to advance themselves and out of their own ego, but solely out of the desire of bringing Kedusha into our lives. So they were humble, even though they seemingly were taking the Malchus. They didn't do it with an ulterior motive. They did it solely from a space of humility and a desire to restore Kedusha and the light of Torah in the world. So too, when we light that Chanukah, that menorah, that's the reminder of that whole story, it has to be placed in a place that's not too lofty, but a place that's in a humble, easily visible space. And therefore, says Rabbi Fink, the connection between these two stories that our Gemara makes is not simply that they're both analyzed by the same three teachers, and not simply that it's beyond 20 amos, it's difficult to see. No, it's meant to teach us this incredible message that just as Yosef HaTzadik had to be humbled in order to become who he was meant to be, in order to take all that he had learned from Yaakov Avinu and become the great leader that he was destined to be, he had to first become humbled in order for that Torah to become manifest, for that wisdom to become manifest. So too, when we light our Chanukah candles, we're reminded that if we want to restore the light of Torah in this world, we want to live up to what it means to do these throughout these 8 days, as Rav Moshe Wolfson that we learned about over the past couple of weeks. Rav Moshe Wolfson taught us that the word Chanukah is comprised of the letters Chet and Kohen. For 8 days, every single one of us becomes a Kohen. Throughout the entire week of 8 days of Hanukkah, every single one of us are like those Chashmonayim. When we light our candles, we're restoring the light of Kedusha and holiness into the world. And in order to do that, we have to do it from a place of humility, not from Chas V'Shalom, a space of haughtiness. Okay? So that's a beautiful idea. And believe it or not, this is all going to come back to now the burning bush as well. So turn your pages over. We're not going to do this whole Shem Shmuel. We're going to do parts of it, so we're going to jump around in it. Okay? The Shem Shmuel is Rabbi Shmuel Borenstein, the second Rebbe of Sakachav. He is the son of the Avnei Nezer, okay? Rabbi Avram Borenstein, the first Rebbe of Sakachav. We're just going to learn. We'll learn a few segments from this longer, so I'm going to jump around. It starts by quoting the Medrash on our pasuk that v'hinei hasneh bo'er ba'esh ve'inenu ukal, right? That this sneh was completely surrounded by fire, engulfed in flame, but it wasn't being consumed. Ubemedrash desne mashal al Yisrael. Wow. The Medrash says that the reason why Hashem appears to Moshe in this way of a bush being completely surrounded by flames, a little humble thorn bush being completely surrounded by flame but not being consumed, that this is a mashal for the Jewish people. V'od sham kamo hasneh shefel mikol. Note, Kain hayu Yisrael shvelim v'yerudim l'Mitzrayim. That just as the thorn bush is the humblest of the trees on earth, right? It's a little thorn bush. Okay, so too the Jewish people had to experience going down to Mitzrayim to become humbled. They had to become what? Humbled in their own eyes. Because they were humbled, even though they were sadly influenced, many of them were sadly influenced by being in that generation of Mitzrayim, of being surrounded by all the tumah of Mitzrayim, they were worthy of being redeemed, says the Shem Shmuel, because they remained humble. They were humble and they remained humble. And think about this, because we're going to jump ahead, but who was the Goel? Who was the one who redeems the Jewish people? Who does Hashem send to redeem the Jewish people? Moshe Rabbeinu. What does the Torah tell us about Moshe Rabbeinu? Anav Mikol Adam. He's the humblest of men upon earth. So let's jump down a few lines. Ki Moshe Rabbeinu Allah Hashem Machmat Avanato HaYitera Shahaya Anam Ma'od Mikol Adam Asher Apia Adama Sheperish Rashi Shefel v'Savlan. He was both humble as well as patient. La Yachol L'Tzayer Ben Hashosh Hashem Yibrach Hayayimo. Im came Amar Mi Anochi Shefel Anashim Roatzon Ki Elecha Paramech Gadol. Moshe Rabbeinu, when Hashem appears to him and gives him his shlichus, what does Moshe Rabbeinu say? What are you talking about? Me? Okay, who am I to go before Paro? He's a great king. Even though he grew up in Paro's home, but for the past number of years, he's been what? I'm a simple shepherd. Who am I to go before Paro? So Hashem, of course, answers him what? It's Dafka, because he is so humble, that Hashem is sending him to be the Redeemer, that he merits to be the Redeemer. Not only that, says the Shem Shmuel, just to jump ahead to the end, where does Hashem appear to him to give him the shlichus? On Har Sinai, which according to Medrash was also the humblest of mountains, the smallest, the most, it wasn't a massive high peak, it was a simple, humble mountain. And therefore, says the Shem Shmuel in this beautiful piece, that the entire experience of Moshe Rabbeinu being the Goel, okay, and he being the one that's worthy to redeem the Jewish people, and how Hashem reveals himself to Moshe and gives him the shlichus, okay, it's on the humblest spot, okay, with the humblest little thorn bush, to the humblest man on earth, to redeem the people that have been humbled. And therefore, says the Shem Shmuel, what necessitates Geula, what facilitates Yeshua to come into the world for Am Yisrael? This idea of humility, of anivut. Okay. Now, the Nesiva Shalom, okay, the Slonimer Rabbi, who we've heard from many, many times as well, the great 20th century, he died in 1999, I believe. So he's really a pretty contemporary Hasidic master. He, in text number 10, we're just going to learn a short snippet from the Slonimer Rebbe. He takes this idea of the representation of the sneh, of the burning bush, being somehow representative or comparable to the Jewish people. He takes it in a slightly different direction. And look at his beautiful words. Yesh levayer od inyan reshit titkalut HaKadosh Baruch Hu Moshe b'dvar hashlichut hagadol l'otziah b'nei Yisrael miMitzrayim. He says there's another idea that can be learned from the introduction that Hashem makes to Moshe Rabbeinu as he sends him on his way, as he introduces him to his important shlichut that he's going to fulfill to redeem the Jewish people from Egypt. Again, he says the sneh is somewhat representative of Am Yisrael, but not just the sneh that it's a humble thorn bush, but the fact that it's surrounded by flames and is not being consumed. Shehu kisneh bor be'esh tumat Mitzrayim. because the Jewish people are like the sneh, surrounded by the impurity and hatred of Egypt. She makor atuma ba'olam, which is the source of all purity in the world. Despite this, what? The sneh, meaning the proverbial sneh, the Jewish people were not consumed. Lo ne'echla kedushatam ba'esh hatuma. Their sanctity, our sanctity, the sanctity of the Jewish people is not consumed by the flames of impurity that surround us or the flames of hatred that might engulf us. What a beautiful message that the son of a Rabbi gives us. And by the way, now let's go full circle and come all the way back to Chanukah. And this is an idea that we've shared in the past few weeks as well, but this really brings it all together. This is the beautiful idea from Rav Kook. And Rav Kook, if you turn your pages sideways, you see this idea from Rav Kook. Rav Kook, in explaining the story of Chanukah, and explaining the famous story of the Nes Pach HaShemen, the miraculous oil. Well, this is how Rav Kook explains this. B'chol Adam Yisrael yesh tzak kahuna. Every single Jew has an aspect of kahuna, of priesthood within us. Because collectively the Jewish people are called what? A priestly nation and a holy people. And the inner desire for the sanctity of life and for the Torah's wisdom, that is hidden deep within the heart of every single Jew. And this is the small cruise of oil. The inner hidden world of the Jew. That is sealed with the insignia of the ultimate Kohen Gadol, meaning who? The Rebbeinu Shalom, right? Lo yachlu hayivanim l'tameh. This the Greeks can never render impure. The word, by the way, the Nes Pach HaShemen, the word Hashemen, corresponds to the otiot of neshama, of the soul. And that's exactly the message that Rav Kook is saying here. Rav Kook is saying, whether or not there was a mystical jar of oil, we talked about that in last week's year, okay? Whether or not there was a mystical jar of oil or not, what was the message that our Chazal were trying to communicate to us in quoting this story of Chanukah as they did in the midst of the discussions of the laws of Shabbos candles, to teach us a very fundamental idea, and that is the Greeks try to what? Eradicate the holiness of Torah. But there was something they didn't understand and could never comprehend, that hidden within every single Jew is a neshama, a pach hashemin, a neshama, okay, the pintele yid. And this, says Rav Kook, no matter what every empire that has tried to destroy us, has tried to lead us away from the light and holiness of Torah, that could never be rendered impure. The neshama is pure. Every single one of us is pure and holy. My friends, as we prepare for this Shabbos Chanukah, where we'll continue to read the story of Yosef HaTzadik, and just in a few weeks we'll look ahead to Parshat Shemot, when we'll read the story of the burning bush. Let's have in mind, as we light our candles this evening, the beautiful imagery of a supernatural flame, a flame that could not be consumed, no matter what hatred and impurity surrounds us. Every single one of us has a pach hashemin, a neshama, innate within us that is untouchable from the outside. May we be blessed to feel that holiness, be blessed to understand and experience that holiness, and share that light with the entire world. Chodesh Tov, Chanukah Sameach.